The death track was legendary for a reason. No one had ever completed it intact, physically or mentally. It wasn't just another race. It was a gauntlet through reality-shredding probability storms, where the laws of physics buckled and time itself became elastic. Most racers who attempted it ended up scattered across 17 dimensions, their consciousness fragmented into quantum echoes. Those were the lucky ones. The unlucky became something else entirely. Jax Corbin didn't care about luck. He cared about answers. The staging area hummed with activity as species from across the galaxy made final preparations. Cathedral-like Althari ships glowed with psychic resonance fields, their translucent hulls revealing shadowy figures in meditative poses. Nearby, the acid-sweating Gorvak hybrids had constructed what looked like living vehicles, biomechanical monstrosities that pulsed with synthetic heartbeats. The telepathic Thorians floated in their gravity-nullifying orbs, their countless eyes blinking in perfect unison as they communicated without sound. And then there was Jax. One human. One stripped-down pod that looked like it belonged in a museum of antique spacecraft, rather than the most dangerous race in known space. Final safety protocols engaged. Corbin. The race coordinator's voice buzzed through his comms, the translator struggling to render the being's 17 simultaneous vocal streams into something a human brain could process. Jax's laugh was sharp and humorless. Something like that. His hands moved with practiced precision over the pod's control surface, bypassing security measures and disabling failsafes. The temporal stabilizer, disconnected. The psychic dampener, removed entirely. The reality anchor that kept pilots tethered to their home dimension. Jax had ripped it out that morning, ignoring the warnings that had flashed across his interface. Warning, reality anchor. Disconnection will result in certain probability dispersion. A clinical way of saying his atoms would scatter across multiple versions of himself. Jax didn't care. The only concession to safety was the small hollow cube mounted on his dashboard. It flickered occasionally, the image of a young woman with his same dark eyes and half-smile struggling to maintain coherence against the probability interference already leaking into the staging area. Mara, his sister, dead 3 years now after the colony transport crash. The crash he should have been piloting, not her. The crash he'd been too hungover to show up for, forcing Mara to take his place at the last minute. All racers, initiate final preparations. Death track materializes in 47 seconds. Around him, the alien vessels began powering up their exotic drive systems. The Althari ships sang in harmonic convergence. The Gorvak monstrosities roared with biological fury. The Thorian orbs pulsed with psychedelic light patterns that would drive most humans to madness just by looking at them. Jax flicked a switch, and his pod's simple fusion drive hummed to life. No fancy tech, no safety measures, just raw speed and his own reflexes. The race coordinator's multiple appendages waved frantically as they approached his pod. "Human Corbin! Our scans indicate you've removed all safety systems. This is unprecedented, even by death track standards." "That's the point," Jax muttered, strapping himself in. "You must understand, without these systems, you won't just lose the race. Your consciousness will fracture across probability space. Your physical form will—" "I know exactly what will happen," Jax cut in. "I've signed your waivers. I know the risks." The coordinator's translation mesh struggled to convey their expression of horror. "Then, why?" Jax's eyes flicked to the hollow cube of Mara. Its image stabilized briefly, her smile freezing in that moment of captured joy before fragmenting again at the edges. "Because winners get to ask one question of the track," he said softly. "One question that receives a true answer, pulled from all possible realities." The coordinator's appendages drooped. "You seek knowledge that cannot be gained in normal space." "I need to know if she blamed me," Jax whispered, too quietly for the translator to pick up. "In those final moments, Did Mara hate me for putting her in that pilot seat? The coordinator sensed the conversation had moved beyond their understanding. They retreated with a formal bow, all 17 of their vocal streams merging into a single, solemn tone. May your consciousness remain cohesive, human Corbin. Jax didn't respond. His attention was on the space ahead, where reality itself was beginning to warp and tear. The death track was manifesting. A planet-sized racecourse materialized from fractured spacetime, riddled with probability storms and paradox wells. A course no living being had ever completed. Racers ready. Death track manifestation at 98%. Launch in 5, 4. Jax's hands tightened on the controls. The hollow cube flickered more violently now, Mara's face distorting. 3, 2. Across his view screen, warning lights flashed. Without the safety systems, his pod's computer was predicting his demise within the first 30 seconds. 1. I'm coming for answers, Mara, Jax whispered. Launch! The universe shredded around him as 23 vessels of various designs blasted into the maw of the death track. Jax's pod, lacking the inertial dampeners that most racers considered essential, slammed him back into his seat with bone-crushing force. A normal human would have blacked out. Jax had spent 3 years preparing his body for this exact moment, and even then, his vision narrowed to pinpricks of light as blood struggled to reach his brain. The first gauntlet of the death track was simple, a tunnel of pure probability distortion, where reality itself became questionable. Without his temporal stabilizer, Jax immediately began experiencing multiple timelines simultaneously. He saw himself crash into the tunnel wall and die. He saw himself emerge victorious. He saw versions where he'd never entered the race at all, and was still drinking himself to death in that dingy apartment on Europa. Most racers experience these visions as dampened echoes through their safety systems. Jax got them raw and unfiltered, slamming into his consciousness like freight trains. He laughed. The pain of simultaneously experiencing multiple realities was exactly what he deserved. The temporal fracturing that threatened to tear his mind apart was nothing compared to the guilt he'd carried since Mara's death. For the first time in 3 years, the external agony matched his internal suffering, and there was a purity in that. His pod shot through the probability tunnel like a bullet, outpacing many of the more sophisticated alien vessels whose safety systems were slowing them down to protect their pilots. Ahead, he could see the first major obstacle, the Schrödinger fork, where the track split into paths that both existed and didn't exist simultaneously. Without a reality anchor, Jax couldn't rely on instruments. The augmented overlay most racers use to navigate the contradictory geography was useless to him. Instead, he did something no other racer would dare. He closed his eyes, let go of the controls, and surrendered to the probability stream. "Show me," he whispered to the storm of realities washing over him. And somehow, it did. With his defenses stripped away, the death track itself seemed to recognize him as something different. Not another protected racer, but a raw consciousness open to its influence. Jax felt, rather than saw, the correct path, his hands returning to the controls and making adjustments without conscious thought. The pod threaded the needle between realities, taking a path that simultaneously existed in all possible configurations of the fork. Behind him, 3 alien vessels crashed into probability dead ends, their pilots' screams cutting off as they were shunted into alternate dimensions. Jax opened his eyes as he emerged from the fork, breathing heavily. The dashboard holocube had stopped working entirely now, Mara's image replaced by static. The loss struck him harder than the G-forces crushing his chest. "Hold on, Mara," he gasped. "Just a little longer." The next section of the track opened into a vast, swirling maelstrom of fractured spacetime, the heart of the storm. Here, even the most advanced alien racers slowed down, their vessels deploying additional shields and reality anchors to prevent being torn apart by the chaotic energies. Jax accelerated. His pod shot into the maelstrom, immediately bombarded by contradictory physics. Gravity reversed, strengthened, disappeared, and twisted in on itself within seconds. Light bent around impossible angles. Time dilated so severely that Jax experienced minutes between heartbeats. Then thousands of heartbeats in a single second. Without protection, his consciousness began to splinter. He saw flashes of other lives he might have lived, as a colony administrator, as a military pilot, as a father with Mara, as a doting aunt to his children. Each vision stabbed him with fresh grief for what could have been. Through the fracturing of his mind, Jax became aware of something, someone, in the storm with him. Not another racer, but a presence woven into the fabric of the track itself. It brushed against his consciousness, curious, surprised to find him so exposed. "You have removed your barriers," it communicated, not in words but in direct conceptual transfer. "Why?" "Need to know," Jax forced out between gritted teeth as his body experienced simultaneous acceleration and deceleration. The presence seemed to consider this. Most seek victory. You seek truth. Interesting distinction. Through the chaos, Jax spotted something. A vessel unlike the others, caught in a probability eddy. It was small and crystalline, pulsing with inner light, and it was being torn apart by the storm. Without thinking, Jax altered course. The maneuver sent him into a spin that would have killed most humans instantly, as conflicting G-forces pulled his body in multiple directions simultaneously. Blood vessels burst in his eyes, turning his vision red. But he maintained control long enough to position his pod alongside the failing crystalline vessel. Acting on instinct, he extended the pod's emergency tether, the one safety feature he hadn't disabled, and locked onto the strange craft. The moment the connection established, Jax's consciousness expanded explosively. The presence he'd sensed flooded into his mind, not invasively, but like water finding its level. He gasped as his perception suddenly extended beyond normal human limits, experiencing past, present, and multiple futures simultaneously. "You saved me," the presence communicated, surprise evident even in this direct form of exchange. No racer has ever diverted from the track to aid another. "Not exactly following the rulebook today," Jax managed, using the tether to pull the crystalline vessel into the minimal protection of his pod's slipstream. The being's consciousness intertwined with his own, and Jax understood it was named, or rather, its function was, the keeper of fading stars. It existed partially in normal space and partially in the probability realm, serving as a witness to dying stellar bodies across multiple dimensions. "Your mind is fracturing," the keeper observed. "Without your safety systems, the probability feedback will destroy your consciousness within moments." "Worth it, if I finish," Jax gasped. The keeper seemed to consider this, its thoughts rippling through Jax's mind. Then, to his shock, it made a decision. "I will stabilize you. My species exists across multiple probability states naturally. I can extend this protection temporarily." Before Jax could respond, his perception shifted. The overwhelming assault of multiple realities suddenly organized into comprehensible patterns. He could still see alternate timelines, still experience contradictory physics. But now, these sensations had structure instead of chaotic agony. "Why are you helping me?" Jax asked. His voice, steadier, as the keeper's influence relieved the worst of the probability stress. "You diverted your path to save me, sacrificing your advantage. This creates obligation, also curiosity. Your species rarely ventures into the track, and never without extensive protection." With the keeper's help, stabilizing his fractured consciousness, Jax navigated through the heart of the storm with increasing confidence. His pod, still dragging the crystalline vessel in its wake. Shot past several more sophisticated alien crafts whose safety systems were slowing them down. "What exactly is the death track?" Jax asked, as they emerged from the storm into a relatively stable section of the course. "The race coordinators say it's a natural phenomenon they've harnessed. But that's clearly not the whole story." The Keeper's thoughts rippled with something like amusement. "It is both natural and constructed. A wound in reality that has been cultivated. The coordinators believe they control it. They are mistaken." Before Jax could ask more questions, his sensor array, what remained of it, screamed warnings. Behind them, gaining rapidly, was a sleek black vessel that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Unlike Jax's stripped-down pod, this ship bristled with technology, its hull covered in pulsing nodes that bent probability around it instead of pushing through it. Vorthana Kess, the Keeper identified. Champion of the last 7 attempts at the track, cybernetically enhanced for direct neural interface with probability states. "Sounds fancy," Jax muttered, pushing his engines harder. "What's his specialty?" "She specializes in psychic warfare. The nodes on her vessel are not just for navigation. They project manufactured memories and emotions into competitors, driving them into probability dead ends." As if on cue, Jax felt a foreign presence scratching at the edges of his consciousness, distinct from the Keeper's supportive integration. This was invasive, searching for weaknesses. "She's trying to get into my head," Jax grunted. "Yes, without your psychic dampener, you would normally be extremely vulnerable. My presence provides some protection, but it is limited." The black ship drew closer, and the psychic assault intensified. Jax felt memories bubbling up, not his own memories, but manufactured scenarios designed to break his concentration. He saw Mara screaming his name as her transport crashed. He heard her cursing him with her dying breath. "Not real," Jax gasped, fighting to maintain control of the pod as it entered the next obstacle. A series of narrow crystalline spires that phased in and out of existence unpredictably. "She's making me see things." "Correct. Vorthan Kess has studied your species. She knows your vulnerabilities, your psychological structure. She will exploit your grief." The false memories intensified. Now Jax saw Mara at his apartment door the night before the crash, begging him to stay sober for his shift. He saw himself pushing her away, laughing cruelly, saying he didn't care about the colonists. "Never happened," Jax snarled, weaving through the appearing and disappearing spires with reckless speed. "I was passed out drunk. I never even spoke to her before the crash." But the falsehood had enough truth wrapped around it to cut deep. He had been irresponsible. He had forced Mara to take his place. The guilt was real, even if this specific memory wasn't. Vorthan's ship was directly behind them now, so close that Jax could see the pilot through the viewscreen. A sleek, cybernetically enhanced humanoid with cables running directly into her skull. Her eyes, entirely mechanical, locked onto his with predatory focus. The next psychic assault hit him like a physical blow. This time, it wasn't just manufactured memories, but direct emotional manipulation. Waves of despair, self-loathing, and hopelessness crashed over him. His hands trembled on the controls as the weight of artificial depression threatened to crush his will to continue. "She is attempting to drive you into the memory maze," the Keeper warned. "It is a section of the track that responds to consciousness, creating physical manifestations of thought patterns. With your current emotional state manipulated toward self-destruction, entering it would be fatal." Jax could see it ahead. A shifting labyrinth of translucent walls that seemed to be made of frozen thought. Through its barriers, he glimpsed other racers trapped in corridors of their own making, some fighting shadowy versions of themselves, others curled into fetal positions as they faced their worst fears. "Don't have much choice," Jax gasped as Vorthan's ship clipped his engine housing, sending the pod into a spin directly toward the maze entrance. Any advice? I can help navigate, but you must resist her manipulations. Focus on what you know to be true, not what she makes you feel. The pod crashed through the entrance to the memory maze. The crystalline vessel of the Keeper, still tethered behind it. Immediately, the walls around them shifted, responding to Jax's consciousness. Despite his best efforts to focus on objective reality, Vorthan's psychic assault had poisoned his thoughts enough that the maze manifested his worst memories and fears. The corridor ahead transformed into the colony transport Mara had piloted. Jax found himself walking through its recreation, complete with phantom passengers, the colonists who had died in the crash. They turned to stare at him with accusing eyes as he passed. Not real, Jax muttered, but his conviction wavered. The detail was perfect, from the scuff marks on the floor to the unique pattern of lights on the control panels. This wasn't just a general approximation of a transport. This was the exact ship Mara had died on. The maze draws from all possible realities, the Keeper explained, its presence a steadying influence in Jax's mind. What you see may not be your reality, but it exists in some version of events. At the end of the corridor, a door opened to reveal the cockpit. Jax's steps faltered. Sitting in the pilot's seat was Mara, her hands moving over the controls as warning lights flashed across the console. She hadn't noticed him yet. "Is this real?" Jax whispered. "Is this what actually happened?" "It is one possibility among many," the Keeper answered. "The maze cannot create absolute truth, only reflections of potential truths across probability space." Vorthan's influence was still present, pushing Jax to believe the worst interpretation of what he was seeing. He felt a compulsion to approach Mara, to hear her final thoughts that Vorthan was shaping to be accusations of betrayal and hatred. Instead, Jax closed his eyes. "Show me the truth," he said, not to the maze or to Vorthan, but to the Keeper. "Not what might have happened or what I fear happened. Show me how to see clearly." The Keeper's consciousness expanded within him. "Open yourself to my perception. My species experiences time differently. We see all moments simultaneously, without the linear progression your kind is limited to." Jax surrendered to the Keeper's influence, and his perception shifted dramatically. Suddenly, he was experiencing the cockpit scene from all temporal directions at once. He saw Mara, not just in her final moments, but throughout the entire flight. Her initial confidence, her growing concern as systems began failing, her determined problem-solving as she fought to save the ship. Most importantly, he saw her thoughts, free from Vorthan's manipulations. There was fear, yes, frustration at the failing systems, but there was no blame for Jax. In her final moments, Mara had been fully focused on saving her passengers. Her mind filled with procedural checklists and emergency protocols, not bitter accusations toward her brother. The realization hit Jax with such force that he staggered. The maze, responding to this shift in his consciousness, began to transform around them. The corridors of guilt and self-recrimination melted away, replaced by a path forward, still challenging, but navigable. Behind them, Vorthan's ship had entered the maze as well. Jax could feel her fury as she realized her psychic manipulations were being countered. She launched a more direct attack, trying to override the Keeper's influence with brute psychic force. "We must move quickly," the Keeper urged. "My ability to shield you is limited, and we are approaching the final stage of the track." With his mind clearer now, Jax raced through the shifting corridors of the maze. The path responded to his new emotional state, creating bridges where before there had been chasms of despair. Other racers remained trapped in their own psychological prisons, but Jax, with the Keeper's unique perspective, navigated through the labyrinth with increasing speed. Vorthan followed, her ship smashing through barriers that Jax had carefully navigated around. Her psychic attacks continued, but were less effective now that Jax had glimpsed a truth beyond his guilt. As they neared the exit, the maze made one final attempt to ensnare them. The corridor ahead split into thousands of identical paths, each leading to a slightly different exit. "Which one is real?" Jax asked, slowing the pod. "All of them and none," the keeper replied. "This is the probability split, a point where reality fragments into its component possibilities. Choose wrongly, and we emerge in a dimension where the race never existed, or where we have already lost." Vorthan was closing in behind them, her ship's engines howling as she prepared for a final assault. Jax had seconds to decide. "You can see all probabilities," Jax said to the keeper. "Guide me." "I can see them. Yes. But there are too many. Even my species cannot process this level of fragmentation instantaneously." Jax thought quickly. "Then we don't choose one path. We choose all of them." Before the keeper could respond, Jax yanked the pod into a spinning maneuver and fired the emergency thrusters at full power. The pod, with the keeper's crystalline vessel still in tow, shot forward, not into any single probability path, but into the very junction where they all converged. For an instant, they existed in all possible outcomes simultaneously. Jax felt his consciousness expand exponentially, experiencing thousands of different race conclusions at once. In some, they crashed and died. In others, they emerged victorious. In still others, they found themselves in entirely different races on different tracks. Then, with a reality-wrenching snap, the pod burst through the junction point and out of the maze, into a single, stable reality where the death track continued. Behind them, Vorthan's ship had chosen a single path and vanished, emerging somewhere else entirely, or perhaps nowhere at all. "Remarkable," the keeper communicated, a new respect coloring its thoughts. "You chose non-choice, a concept most species cannot even comprehend." "Less philosophy, more racing," Jax gasped, his body and mind pushed to their limits by the strain of momentarily existing across multiple realities. "What's left?" "Only the final challenge, tomorrow's graveyard." Ahead, the track opened into a vast, misty expanse. As they entered, Jax saw what appeared to be thousands of wrecked vessels, the remains of failed attempts at completing the death track. But there was something unsettling about these wrecks. They shifted and changed as he watched, some fading from existence while others appeared. "These are not past failures," the keeper explained, sensing Jax's confusion. "They are future possibilities, all the ways you might fail from this point forward." Jax understood the psychological warfare at play. The graveyard was designed to demoralize racers, to make them believe failure was inevitable by showing them their own potential demise in countless variations. Among the shifting wrecks, Jax spotted dozens of versions of his own pod. Some crushed, others exploded, still others simply drifting lifelessly. In each wreck, he could see a version of himself, dead from impact, suffocated from life support failure, brain dead from probability exposure. "Cheery place," Jax muttered, navigating carefully between the phantom wrecks. "The graveyard is the final guardian of the finish line," the keeper said. "Few make it this far. Fewer still maintain the will to continue after seeing their inevitable failures." "Nothing's inevitable," Jax replied, accelerating. "That's the whole point of probability, isn't it? Anything can happen." As they pushed deeper into the graveyard, the phantom wrecks began to actively interfere, shifting into their path, recreating the exact accidents that had caused their demise. Jax had to constantly adjust course, sometimes passing directly through fading wrecks that hadn't fully materialized in their reality. Without warning, a familiar black ship appeared ahead of them. Vorthan had found her way back to the main track through some alternate route. Her vessel was damaged, portions of its hull missing or warped by probability exposure. But the psychic nodes were still active and pulsing with menace. "She has circumvented the probability split," the keeper observed with surprise. "A near impossible feat." "She's determined. I'll give her that," Jax said, preparing for another psychic assault. But Vorthan had changed tactics. Instead of trying to manipulate Jax's memories or emotions, she was now targeting the keeper. Jax felt the attack ripple through their shared consciousness, an attempt to sever the connection that had protected him throughout the race. The keeper's presence flickered in his mind, weakening under the assault. The carefully organized patterns of probability that the keeper had maintained began to unravel, and Jax felt the full weight of the death track crashing back into his unprotected consciousness. "Hold on!" Jax shouted, both aloud and mentally, trying to reinforce their connection through sheer will. Cannot. Maintain. Cohesion. The keeper's thoughts fragmented in his mind. Her attack, targeted at my species. Vulnerabilities. Vorthan's ship pulled alongside them, close enough that Jax could see her triumphant expression through the viewscreen. The psychic nodes on her vessel focused entirely on the keeper's crystalline craft, bombarding it with precisely calibrated energy patterns. The tether connecting the keeper's vessel to Jax's pod began to strain, the connection weakening under the assault. If it broke, the keeper would be left behind, vulnerable to Vorthan's attack and the chaotic energies of the track. In that moment, Jax made a decision. The finish line was visible now, a shimmering portal at the far end of the graveyard. He could make it if he cut the tether, abandoning the keeper to save himself. He'd come this far for one purpose, to ask his question about Mara. Nothing else mattered. And yet, through their mental connection, fading though it was, Jax had come to understand the keeper in ways no words could convey. It was a being of profound compassion, witnessing the deaths of stars across countless realities, not out of morbid fascination, but as an act of cosmic remembrance. Nothing should die unwitnessed, unremembered, the keeper believed. Not stars, not people, not civilizations. Jax thought of Mara, dying alone in that pilot's seat. Had anyone witnessed her final moments with such compassion? No, Jax said firmly, both to himself and to Vorthan's psychic probing. Not this time. Instead of cutting the tether, Jax did something that no racer in the history of the death track had ever done. He diverted power from his engines to his pod's shields, extending what little protection he had to cover the keeper's vessel as well. The maneuver cost them speed, allowing Vorthan to pull ahead. But it stabilized the keeper's crystalline craft, giving the being a chance to recover from the psychic assault. Why? The keeper's thoughts, though weak, carried genuine confusion. The finish line? Your question. Your sister. Some things are more important, Jax replied, fighting to maintain control as his pod's overtaxed systems began to fail. With the immediate crisis averted, the keeper's presence in Jax's mind gradually strengthened. As it recovered, Jax felt a change in their connection, a deepening, as if the keeper had made a decision of its own. Jax Corbin. The keeper communicated with newfound clarity. You have shown a quality rare among any species. In return, I offer you what my kind almost never shares with others. Before Jax could ask what this meant, his perception expanded exponentially. The keeper wasn't just sharing its ability to navigate probability, it was sharing its fundamental nature, its way of experiencing reality. For a brief, overwhelming moment, Jax perceived time as the keeper did, not as a linear progression, but as a simultaneous totality, all moments existing at once in an eternal now. In that expanded awareness, Jax saw Mara's life in its entirety, her birth, her childhood alongside him, her accomplishments, her struggles, her final moments, all existing simultaneously. He saw that her life, though ended too soon, had been filled with purpose and love. He saw that in her final moments, she had been focused not on blame, but on saving others, an act of courage that defined her far more than the circumstances that put her in that pilot's seat. Most importantly, he saw their relationship across time, the love that had always existed between them, unchanged by any single moment or action. As the expanded perception faded, returning him to normal human consciousness, Jax found himself weeping, not from grief, but from a profound relief and understanding that transcended the guilt he'd carried for so long. Ahead, Vorthan's ship was approaching the finish line. She would win, would get to ask her question of the track. Jax found he no longer cared. Then something unexpected happened. Vorthan's ship, almost at the portal, suddenly veered off course. The vessel spun wildly, its psychic nodes flaring with chaotic energy. Through their view screen, Jax could see the pilot struggling with controls that no longer responded to her commands. "She has overextended," the keeper observed. "In attacking me with such force, she disrupted her own neural interface with her vessel. The probability backlash has shattered her connection." The black ship careened into a cluster of phantom wrecks, becoming indistinguishable from the future failures it crashed among. Whether Vorthan survived was impossible to tell. She had become just another potential casualty in tomorrow's graveyard. The path to the finish line was clear. Jax's pod, systems failing and hull integrity compromised, limped toward the shimmering portal. The keeper's crystalline vessel, still connected by the emergency tether, pulsed with renewed energy. "We're going to make it," Jax said, allowing himself to hope for the first time since entering the race. "Yes," the keeper agreed, "but I sense you have changed your purpose." Jax nodded. "I don't need to ask the track about Mara anymore. I understand now." As they approached the finish line, the portal's energy intensified, reaching out to them with tendrils of pure probability. The moment of transition was upon them, the moment when the track would acknowledge their victory and grant the winner's question. In the final seconds before crossing the threshold, Jax made his decision. "The question is yours," he told the keeper. "You saved me, not just my life, but from the prison I built for myself. Ask what you need to." The keeper's surprise rippled through their connection. "This is unprecedented. The question is the sole purpose of the race." "Not for me. Not anymore." The portal engulfed them, and reality seemed to pause. The track manifested not as a voice or entity, but as a shift in probability itself. The universe briefly aligning to make the impossible possible, the unknowable knowable. Askin, it seemed to say, not in words, but in the sudden focusing of infinite possibilities. The keeper's consciousness expanded alongside Jax's, and together they formulated the question, not about Mara or Jax's guilt, but about the keeper's dying world, a planet in a distant dimension whose star was failing faster than it should, threatening a species whose purpose was to witness the death of stars, but who now faced extinction themselves. The track answered not with words but with knowledge, pure, direct, and absolute. Jax understood without knowing how he understood. The keeper's world could be saved, but only through a complex manipulation of probability at the quantum level, requiring technology beyond anything the keeper's people possessed. Technology that, by coincidence or fate, Vorthan's species had developed. As the portal's energy faded and normal reality reasserted itself, Jax and the keeper found themselves ejected back into the staging area. Around them, the race coordinators and spectators erupted in shock and celebration. The death track had been conquered, the impossible achieved. Jax's pod, barely holding together, settled onto the ground with a final wheeze of failing systems. The keeper's crystalline vessel pulsed with new purpose, the knowledge gained from the track already being integrated and processed. Medical teams rushed toward Jax's pod, expecting to find yet another casualty of the track's brutal effects. Instead, they found him alive, conscious, and smiling. Perhaps the first racer ever to emerge from the death track in better psychological condition than when he entered. 30 seconds, one of the coordinators was saying, their 17 vocal streams barely coherent in their excitement. You completed the final gauntlet in 30 seconds. The closest previous attempt took 14 minutes before failure. Jax wasn't listening. His attention was on the hollow cube that had somehow survived on his dashboard. Mira's image had returned, clearer than ever. Her smile no longer a source of pain, but a reminder of the love they had shared. "What will you do now?" the keeper asked, as technicians worked to safely disengage the tether between their vessels. "Find Vorthan," Jax replied, his voice hoarse but determined. "If she survived, she has the technology your people need. I think after what happened in the race, she might be open to some perspective changes of her own." "And after that?" Jax looked at Mira's image one last time, then gently powered down the holocube and placed it in his pocket. "Live," he said simply. "Something I haven't really done for 3 years." As the medical team helped him from the pod, Jax noticed a memorial wall where the names of all who had died attempting the death track were inscribed. With a respectful nod to the race coordinators, he approached the wall and removed a small laser tool from his flight suit. Carefully, he added a new name to the wall, Mira Corbin. Not because she had died on the track, but because, in a way, she had raced it alongside him today. Her memory had driven him to enter. Her love had helped him survive, and letting go of his guilt over her death had finally allowed him to finish. The keeper, its crystalline form hovering nearby, observed this final act with what Jax sensed was approval. "You honor her memory," it communicated. "In my culture, this is the highest purpose, to witness, to remember, to carry forward." "In mine too," Jax replied, stepping back from the wall. "Just took me a while to understand that." As the celebrations continued around them, and news of the track's completion spread across the galaxy, Jax and the Keeper quietly withdrew to plan their journey to find Vorthan and save the Keeper's world. The race was over, but their partnership, forged in the probability storms of the death track, was just beginning. For the first time since Mira's death, Jax felt something he had thought lost forever: hope, not just for the Keeper's people, but for himself. The death track had nearly killed him, had torn his mind apart and forced him to confront his deepest failures and fears. And somehow, he had emerged stronger. Somehow, he had found not just the answer he sought, but a truth far more profound: that guilt could be transformed into purpose, and that even in the heart of a probability storm, the future remained unwritten. He was, at last, free to live it.